Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Staffordshire Police Fire and Crime Panel meeting on the 26th of September at Staffordshire, in Staffordshire today. May I remind everyone that this meeting is being webcast, so the public will be watching if they feel it's appropriate to do so. May I ask that you switch your phones off or have them on quiet and use the microphone when you wish to speak. I assume you've all had the agenda, and we'll drive to that document today. So the first item on the agenda is item 1, apologies.
Thank you, Chair. I've received apologies from Councillors Somers and Hudson, and also an apology from Mr. Bowen.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? None. Thank you. The minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of June. I've had a brief read through those. They seem to be okay to me. I'm prepared to propose that we accept those. Thank you. Thank you very much. Those are accepted then. May I just say at this point, I thank the Commissioner for a letter that he sent to us following the last meeting, acknowledging the points that were made. That was gratefully received, and thank you for that letter, Commissioner. Item 4 on the agenda is questions to the Police and Crime Commissioner from members of the public. And I understand we have a question. Good morning.
Thank you, Chairman.
May I just intervene? Would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Deborah Malander, and I'm a member of the public with a question for the relevant Commissioner. Given the doctrine of proportionality belongs to civil law as opposed to criminal law, one wonders why that has been produced in the response. I'll go to the question with that background information in mind. And I say, doesn't the absence of convictions during policing operations at Wallace Quarry suggest a pattern of poor policing, poor police judgment, and under the days of mass policing in question? The second question, do you want me to read the second question first?
Yes, please.
Before the responses are heard? What work is Staffordshire Police going to do to regain the confidence of the taxpayer who, after all, appear to pay their wages? And I'm talking about the local community, of course.
Thank you. Well, you've made a response, Commissioner, haven't you?
Excuse me. Different technology in this room, Chairman. Good morning, and morning to Mrs. Melander. Yes, you've made a response. Do you propose that I read this out, Chairman, or?
I think for the purpose of the meeting, yes, please.
Yeah, let's do that. Right, so we've had some informed responses here from the service, and apologies for the length, but I think they go to some. They are of some value in directly answering the question. So the question 1, all the cases in question were reviewed by the Crown Prosecution Service, and they took the decision to discontinue the prosecutions. Following an appeal by the police, the Crown Prosecution Service upheld their initial decisions, but stated the act of the police in removing the protesters to allow the use of the site was a proportionate one. But in the application of DPP versus Ziegler 2021, the CPS concluded that whilst the S137 obstruction of the highway offences were made out, it was not proportionate to prosecute. And perhaps, Chairman, I could just sort of put that into plainer language. What they're saying there is that the Crown Prosecution Service recognised that the highway was being impeded in some form, therefore it was legitimate to arrest. However, they're sort of saying it's not in the public interest to go to the cost, expense, time, energy, etc., when we've got court backlogs and all the rest of it, to actually follow through to prosecution. And I think for me this is a really It's a pretty dry response, but it goes right to the heart of the issue, that the police service are always being asked to make judgment calls around protecting the right of people to prosecute, which is fundamental in our the way we do things here in Britain, but also to balance that with the potential disruption not only to businesses but to the public and the wider interest. So it's interesting to note that whilst Wally's Quarry is somewhere where a lot of people have considerable concerns, and quite rightly, about some of the issues, literally the issues of gas and so on from that site, which I'm pleased to say are much, much improved, there are other protests taking place around Staffordshire where there's far less public support. And actually the nature of the questions and challenge we get there is that why are the police seemingly reluctant to prosecute and to intervene? And the reason is they're trying...
Right of rebuttal. This goes beyond the response of the police themselves.
Would you mind not interrupting the Commissioner, please, and direct your questions through me?
Right of rebuttal, please.
Thank you, Chair.
Carry on, Commissioner.
So I think the key here, and I do appreciate Mrs. Mellender's concerns, absolutely appropriate language is around proportionality. And the police service talk all the time, about whether it is proportionate to intervene and the nature of their intervention. They have considerable powers, as you know, including the use of force. However, balancing that principle of freedom of speech whilst protecting the rest of the community is a tricky balance to make. I'm very conscious, particularly with HS2 coming, we've talked about that before here, the impact that that can have on our police service to distract them from their core business, if you like, which is keeping us safe on a daily basis. The amount of individual officers involved at protest sites is quite considerable. And we really do urge people, protest safely, protest within the law, protest on areas which are designated as permissible. Don't stray from that, because those officers could be engaged with other activity at the time. Now, on the second question, this is really about regaining the confidence of the taxpayer, who, after all, appear to pay their wages. The taxpayer does not appear to pay anybody's wages. The taxpayer pay the wages, full stop. Public services are taxpayers' money. And of course, how that is spent, how that is used, how that is allocated is not purely in the interests of any individual. Staffordshire Police continue to work closely with all of the agencies involved, engaging regularly with the communities and businesses. There's been a rich and varied picture of public engagement and partnership working since the issue began to gather momentum around 2 to 3 years ago. Consultation with elected members, including local councillors and key community contacts, Aaron Bell MP, numerous inquiries and updates passed for his constituency office to be aware of. Business community offered contact and updates from local officers. Staffordshire Police, social media updates. Staffordshire Police, statements and updates via the press office. Numerous police and multi-agency public consultation events face-to-face. PCSOs tasked with conducting citizens' contact records in the affected areas to identify local policing priorities. A complaint SPOC assigned in Professional Standards Department for protest policing-based issues. Regular engagement with Red Industries to understand the position and movement within the community. Community impact assessments, managed and regularly reviewed to understand community tension. A local policing presence at protests in addition to the police support unit, public order trained officers, delegation to offer consistency and familiarity. So there's been for 2 or 3 years a continual and active process. I'm not sure that talks about the public meetings which are hosted as well, and members of the public are able to express their concerns directly at those too. So, notwithstanding, this is this is a classic issue where you have different interests of different parties, and the police in the middle of this. They're not in a position to determine one way or the other. I think the service has done what it can to be fully engaged in whatever activity, whatever voice is being expressed.
Thank you, Commissioner. There you have your answer then.
Right. No, I don't have my answers there. It appears to be words only. What we see on the ground is considerably different. There was a lady who was assaulted in a field, and she got contacted by the police several weeks later. This is after an injunction, a private law, was issued by the company concerned. That's at Wally's Quarry. So they had no excuses.
I don't know whether.
That.
Excuse me.
So there's no excuses.
Excuse
for
me.
For rushing down in military formation to Wally's Quarry, as happened at August the 25th, 2021.
May I ask the member of the public if you have another question, and then I'll decide whether that's a supplementary question and whether we'll allow it. Do you have another question?
I most certainly do have another question. The police have received, even after I put these questions in, a letter of complaint from the local community, which states quite clearly that policing and its relationship with the local community has not improved. In fact, it's got worse. As soon as Red Industries ring the police, 2 police turn up. When a member of the public want the police, it's a phone call 2 or 3 weeks later. That's not good policing. That is not good judgment around a very, very well documented concern.
Excuse me again.
Surrounding Wally's Quarry.
Listen, as a member of the public, right, you're here to ask a question, you've got your answer, you're asking whether there's, I asked you if you had a supplementary, you still haven't asked it. Now, I'm going to assume in a moment that you haven't got one and your time is finished. Right. So have you got a question?
Well, in addition to that background
have you got a question?
Yes, when is the policing going to improve in the local area, please?
Now, the Commissioner may choose to answer that, or he may want to get back to you as soon as possible. So are you prepared to answer that today, Commissioner, or would you need time to answer it?
Well, I think we're going to, unfortunately, we're going to fundamentally disagree over the description of not good policing. And I think I've made the best explanation I can as to why these things are difficult to balance. You can't, in these circumstances, fully satisfy the hopes of every member of the community. What I'm comfortable with, and actually I'm quite insistent of the service, is that they stay engaged with the community, they listen to every point of view and perspective, and they are there to continue to respond without fear or favour. I know there's another public meeting, it's either happened in the last few days or it's coming up in the next few days, and I'm going to be in touch with the new local commander in Newcastle-under-Lyme just to get his feedback from that. This is something I watch all the time, and I greatly appreciate Mrs. Mellender's concern about this, because I know the whole community in the area, particularly those affected directly by the smell, are rightly and truly fed up of it. So it's not a case around supporting or not supporting the issue. It's a case of, for me, around are the police fully engaged and are they informed and able to act in a proportionate manner. I'm pretty confident that they do. But I'll keep my eye on it, and I will personally be getting up to see people. I've knocked doors up there before, spoken about this with local community members before. Let's go and do a little bit more of that.
When will you be meeting the local community, please, Commissioner?
I'll be happy to come and meet the local community at a suitable forum. I believe there's a meeting coming up very soon, isn't there?
There's possible. Can you make arrangements to meet those people who are community leaders?
And apologies, Chairman, this is
No, Mrs.
a
Melinda,
chat between us, but I'm very happy to meet up, and perhaps I can catch up with Mrs. Melander outside the meeting.
I think that's a fair offer. We have an agenda today. It's fairly tight,
Certainly.
and I want to stick to it. Just let me ask colleague members around the table, do you have any questions on this subject that's been raised today? No. Mrs. Barnes.
To you, Mrs. Melander, I'm a bit confused about what you're saying, to be honest. I'm just wanting some clarification. Earlier on you said about not prosecuting. Who were you on about? The members of the public protesting?
Yes, and what it is that the point about proportionality, it's a doctrine of proportionality. I shall have to explain that I'm postgraduate law, and I did go into this in some detail before I came here, and the doctrine of proportionality appears in civil law. The police are only involved in criminal law. Proportionality in criminal law appears mainly to take place after conviction, after and
Can I just
during
interrupt
litigation.
you there, please?
Well, that
because
means...
the clarity I wanted...
Yes, go on.
Can I intervene? I'm chairing this meeting. Mrs. Barnes has asked a question. I don't think she wants detailed explanation around points of law. If you can answer that question simply, please do so. If you can't, Mrs. Barnes, a moment, please.
Thank you. Sorry,
If you
Chair.
can't, we'll have to set it aside and deal with it outside the meeting. So a simple answer, please, which I hope Mrs. Barnes will be satisfied. But I don't want this protracted conversation to go on much longer because we have a tight agenda. So can you answer that question simply?
All I want to know is, what are you complaining about? That the police haven't prosecuted them? Because I'm not clear. But you seem to be a member of the public. I live quite close to Wally's Quarry, so I know a lot what's going on. And I am a bit concerned about the issues of the problems with the parking and blocking the road, but I feel that the people who've blocked the road are the lorries going into Wally's Quarry. That's my experience, not the members of the public, so I don't understand what you're saying.
I'm not quite sure I understand the question either, to be honest.
Let me ask the Commissioner...
Could you write it down, please, and I will answer it as much as possible. Thank you.
Commissioner? Could you switch your microphones off, Mrs. Barnes?
Sorry.
Chairman, just to assist, it's my understanding that one or two individuals were arrested, removed from the site. They were protesting, engaged in certain behaviours. Subsequently, the Crown Prosecution Service didn't support the police's request that they were prosecuted. And in fact, the response about proportionate is from the CPS rather than the police service response. However, I hope that helps Mrs. Barnes in understanding the nature of the situation.
Okay, thank you. Okay. I'm going to move on to the next item on the agenda now. Item 5, decisions published by the Commissioner. There are 3 references there. I'd just like to make note to the third one, the decision regarding the Armed Police Training Facility. This is subject of a meeting later this year. I think it's in November. So I don't really think there's much scope for discussion today. Is there anything you'd like to add to what's written already, Commissioner? It's been a long time coming, this facility.
It has indeed, but I think members will appreciate that this is a really significant capital commitment and one that's absolutely essential for the future safety of people in the force area. You may recall just before I was elected last year, there was some discussion about a new firearms training facility, talk of 100-metre ranges, 18 million plus. I think the previous Commissioner felt it was not appropriate to make a decision on that just prior to the election. I was happy to pick it up and was not particularly convinced of the merits of some of the proposals, the value for money, but most importantly, whether we'd thoroughly explored opportunities to consider sharing a resource like this with neighbouring forces. It's taken a little while, a year or so, to get right through that process. It's a very thorough one. It's come up with a really quite straightforward solution that we base the firearms training range, improve the armoury, etc. at the HQ in Stafford, and that's the best value and best guarantee that we've got a service into the future. And I believe, Chairman, that we're going to come and what we've offered the panel an opportunity to go through in detail how we arrived at that decision.
That's the meeting in November that I made a reference to. So we're looking forward to that.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Item 6 on the agenda, the Police and Crime Plan update. So if you'd like to talk to that item, Commissioner, please. We've all had the report, we've read the report. There may be a few questions, but we'd be interested to hear what you say about way ahead. We recognise that the new Chief Constable inherited everything in that report that was drawn out as being in need of attention, and I think the way ahead has been mapped out, but I wonder if you'd like to just give us an overview as to the way ahead.
Chairman, apologies, got myself in a bit of a pickle. Did we miss the action log? Are we going back to that one, item 4? I think on this particular item, Police and Crime Plan update, there's a report there for you. I think the significant things for me here, going to the heart of your question, is, okay, we've got a plan. I think we are now in a position to even better see why that plan was so important in terms of the recent inspection by His Majesty's inspectors, because a good chunk of the plan was actually going directly to some of the key issues. So I think the panel's going to be mostly interested in just some highlights I've pulled out here about where we're going. So on 4.1, in progress to date, new police operating model, that came into effect just at the end of June. The early indications are that it's providing increasing capacity to respond, which is exactly what we needed, to investigate crime, give victims more time, and improve those response times, particularly to urgent and emergency calls. I think I'd add to that by saying that it's been well received. Certainly the stations, the staff I've been around to talk to, feel they're working together more productively, real sense of using local knowledge, and as we fully staff that up, it's another 4 or 5 months yet to get the next tranche of recruits in there. I think we're going to see more visible policing, more particularly around public areas, as well as going to some of the core issues in the report, which were improved contact, improved response, support for victims, and better investigation. So references in 4.12 to that as well. It's not just about consistency for victims and witnesses for me. It's about really encouraging our service to get back to the point of seeing their key job as looking after the victims of crime and reducing the number of victims. Grade 1 incidents. Worth mentioning, Chairman, at this stage, I think I've got the next public performance meeting with the Chief Constable on the 4th. It'll be in this room. It'll be webcast. Members of the panel are very welcome to come and observe that in person if they'd like to. That's a real opportunity to see not only the detail of the performance that we put in the public domain, but also to see Helen and I directly asking the Chief Constable about how he's improving some of those indicators. So a key meeting on the 4th. Validating crime. There's some backlogs, particularly around Victims Gateway, getting crimes validated. And those backlogs are largely removed now. Similarly, just taking account there in on page 19 of the demand, probably 20% up across the country on 999 compared with pre-COVID, for all sorts of reasons, not least more issues at football matches, more protests as it happens, causing redirection of police services around the country. But also, as I've mentioned here before, quite a lot of calls finding themselves, people calling through to the police that might be better supported and handled by other organisations. And I continue with the Chief Constable and Chief Fire Officer in our engagement with other authorities about how we might improve that. At this stage, there's been some considerable investment in the contact centre, not just in training people, which are starting to become fully trained and capable of taking calls on their own. It takes some months to do that, but also bringing in officers, a new triage system, which means a lot of people calling in are redirected very quickly if they've just called the number. Essentially, they've made a poor choice in calling those numbers. And we're sort of keeping the times at about where they were. Still not good enough, but considering the demand's gone up considerably and the complexity of those calls, we haven't seen a deterioration in our performance. Other areas are struggling, and in fact, across the region, there's been quite a bit of forces picking up 999, but busy times for each other. That's mirrored across the country as well. At the bottom of page 19, those 3,000 laptops are out. That means that officers are working in the community. They're also getting new mobile technology. We brought forward that spending. My Commissioner's independent scrutiny panels are now in place, focusing on their stop and search use of force work, and also those custody visitors who do a tremendous job. Myself and my deputy are absolutely committed around reducing antisocial behaviour. Some of the members in this room will have met Helen, who's on a tour of community safety partnerships, meeting the portfolio leads. Very keen to just raise the profile of the grants and make sure that we're making local decisions to try and reduce antisocial behaviour and crime locally. Equally, just about ready to finish the work on the illegal trespass protocol, and a number of areas will have experienced perfectly positive experiences with travelling communities, one or two less so. And I'm hoping that new protocol will mean a more consistent approach by councils as well as the police service, by the way. And then finally, 4.16, I do want to mention that the public survey work has kicked off. This is something I was very keen to start last year. We've used an organisation that have done some other force areas of similar nature, so we've not only got data that's interesting in itself, but interesting to compare with other places. Not quite happy with the number of respondents first time round, so we're going to invest some more and we're going to roll this because it's our key way of getting accurate confidence numbers. What's that about the forum? That's the Community Safety Forum. That I'll jump that because it's really about moving on that work on antisocial behaviour and illegal trespass. Safer Streets, I believe this was new actually. The Safer Streets 4, that round announced since the last panel meeting, another £750,000, and some detail will be with us very soon about how we're going to be using that in Stoke-on-Trent, Stafford, Burton and Newcastle. Particularly interested to see, Chairman, how we're using that in Burton, because as you know there's been some heightened concerns around knife crime, and I was very honoured actually to be alongside Mr and Mrs Freckleton the other day, who lost their son in December to a knife attack, and they are, through their own energy, getting sponsorship to put Stop the Bleed kits outside public buildings. We've made space at the police and fire station for that last week, and I can tell you that was quite an emotional morning. These are kits that might mean you can stop somebody bleeding to death before paramedics arrive, whether knife crime or an accident or something of that nature. More work on violence against women and girls, and the CSE children missing, which continues to be of note for me. 517 children between April and June this year went missing for one reason or another. That is a considerable demand on police service for all the right reasons. Quite often those are individuals at risk, and there's those return home interviews are all part of hopefully meaning children don't repeatedly leave their place of safety. So, Chairman, I think other items in there members will pick up. Mostly those are related to the commissioning activity, but we had a good go at that in our annual report last time round, didn't we? So I think I'd be very happy to take questions, if that's okay with you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll ask colleagues in a moment to join in on that specific aspect of questions. My reaction to a couple of specific things, and I think 415, the illegal trespass protocol, and then looked at 423, I didn't get a sense of pace around these things. I mean, do you dictate a timeline to get this work up and running and scoped and defined? Is there a sense of pace behind these activities? And I think what the public bleed kit that you mentioned is a fine example of local communities stepping up and wanting to work in something that I think we both share the same view. This is all about teams, agencies coming together to help each other. And this is a fine example in East Staffordshire of that happening. And I do hope, Commissioner, that you'll be able to continue to support these things and recognise them. Let me go round to colleagues. And any questions for the Commissioner on the report that he's shared with us today? Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Commissioner, and welcome. Could I ask a question, please, on the local and responsive service that you refer to? I think we'd all welcome the improved numbers in the contact centre. And I did have a question, and you've already alluded to it in your answer. We want to improve 101 and we want to improve 999 responses. Unfortunately, we've seen a 20% increase, as mentioned in the report, but you said we kind of where we were at based on the new staff and the increase in demand. Now, there's a number of things that you mentioned in there, the triage system and the staff changes. Based on all the work that you've done, and we're still where we're at, and we understand some of the reasons that you've indicated, what further do you think we can do to actually improve that then, with all those things that you've already put in place?
Thank you. Through you, Chairman. I think we've got to see some of this stuff in bed now, particularly bring through the new staff. It's about 6 months, as I said, to get them fully up to speed. We've got another tranche coming in as well for next year. What we find is that quite a number of people coming into that step on to go into the police service. And so we're training and then they've moved on again, which is positive. But it's important to have that stability. The service has improved. A number of people will say they're now getting a rapid response. It's just not yet where it needs to be. There are a whole series of things that are being worked in. And I think realistically, we're about 4 or 5 months into the practical application of the work. Whilst we've been discussing the issue for some time, it was the advent of the arrival of the new Chief Constable in December, him bringing in some expertise from other forces has really accelerated this in the last 2 or 3 months. And just managing those changes as a result of coming out of COVID. Quite interesting for me to see that the call volumes were not significantly lower during COVID, but that was because a lot of people were reporting COVID-related incidents, neighbours perhaps having parties or people not where they needed to be because of COVID law. Now, those weren't particularly complicated cases. A lot of the stuff coming through now is complex, missing people, people at risk, real risk to life around some of it, and it needs quite a lot of time determining exactly what's the best response. So we'll continue to monitor that very carefully. You'll see on the 4th some more detailed work and actually some more sophisticated measurement of the contact performance. My concern at the moment is while the triage is dealing with a lot of people, those that still need to be in the queue, they're not necessarily getting an answer as quickly as they need still, particularly on 101. So it's more of the same. See those new numbers really start to add some value. And we're discussing some other stuff as well, like changing of shift patterns and things like that. And this is one of the, when you talk about PACE chairman, you have to remember that a model, an idea, there are humans behind it with lifestyles, with working practices. So there's engagement with unions, there's engagement with representatives about making changes that might influence them that take some months in some cases. Brian, this is still number one for me. And, you know, I think a few people, particularly when I was campaigning on this and put it in my plan, thought that's a bit of a nice to have. You know, let's get some real heavy-duty policing. And if we can answer the phone a bit quicker, that's a nice to have. Well, you saw in the HMI report the other day, it goes to confidence, it goes to victims' reassurance, it goes to how quickly we respond. It's not just about speed, it's about the quality of the response. Are we definitely going to the highest risk calls first? Are we getting there soon enough? There's people on 101 that should be using 999. There's people on 999 that should be not on either of the lines, quite frankly, but you can't determine that unless you're getting into the communication quickly. So it will stay number one until it's right.
Thank you. Mrs. Edgeler.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for your report, Commissioner. I mean, I pick up on the last question, actually, the 101. I mean, I've sat on this committee now since it started, and this 101 is an absolute nightmare. And please, Commissioner, can we have, at least in the next few months, some improvement? I mean, I sat there the other night at 20 to 1, dialing 101. 20 minutes later, I'm still sat there. And at that time in the morning, you know, it's ridiculous. And the public are crying out for this to be improved. So please, can we have some improvement? Having said all that, and going back to the report on the police that's come out, you know, this is historical. Relating back to the years gone by, really, because we've got the new commissioner, the new chief constable on board, and I welcome the way that he's working. I've got to say that I was really pleased to see chief inspectors from different police stations being out on the streets and wanting to meet the general public, which I think is which is what's needed. The public need to be able to know that they can trust the police and they're there for them. Having said so, I really welcome, and I'm hoping to see in the next 6 to 12 months the improvement in that. I think it's absolutely, you know, spot on, that more police presence. I've got to say, you know, having said all that, antisocial behaviour, which I'm picking up, is on the increase. It really is. And I'm just wondering how we can tackle it and what we can do to, you know, to make the public feel safe, So I'll leave you with those thoughts, Commissioner, about the antisocial behaviour, because I think there's a few people probably in this room are finding that antisocial behaviour is on the increase. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs Barnes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very pleased to hear that it is improving in the 101 and 999 calls. But I feel I've got to say this. I've been involved with 2 calls, one to 999 and one to 101. Now, the 101 was because a young girl was being groomed. She didn't realise she was being groomed on the internet, but the parents are quite hot on checking what's going on. They've got some parental blocks on it, and they still managed to get through. So this mother rang 101, and the words were, yes, we'll be out, we'll come out. Just keep all the evidence. She took a day off work. They never said when they were coming, granted, so maybe she was hasty in taking a day off work. I've actually tried to contact her just to see if they've come out, because this is a week ago. Up to Friday, they still hadn't came out to speak either to the young lady or the parents. I know they've got to prioritise. I know the person grooming isn't there at that time. But if you put yourself in the position of the parents who are absolutely beside themselves with graphic, not very nice graphic things coming through, and she's just started high school, which is quite a bad time. It's a difficult time with the hormones and everything else, and thinking they're grown up, but they're not. She hasn't answered me back, so I don't know if they've come out yet. But if they haven't, then we're talking of over a week ago now. And then I just think if they can't come out, if they're thinking, well, she's not in imminent danger now, can they explain when they're going to come out? Because it's not fair if a parent has taken the day off, feeling devastated, not knowing which way to turn. And then I had another resident contact me. It was a 999 call due to ASB. They were having glass bottles, metal things just being randomly thrown onto cars and windows. And he contacted me because he did the 999 call, expecting them to come out, and it was an hour later they came out. Obviously, the offenders had gone. Maybe some explanation might go down well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Lees. Sorry, Councillor, would you like to answer that question, Commissioner, or are you just noting what Mrs Barnes has said?
I'll take it for it, if you like.
Okay, yeah. Right. Councillor Lees, please.
Commissioner, we've read the Inspectorate report, and the recommendations are Staffordshire Police must improve. We know you've addressed some of the problems. Perhaps you could go over the way you're going to move forward on that request.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Yeah, I do want to speak about ASB, but just coming back on the point about call handling and the response, I think it's easy to look at individual cases. I think on a wider perspective, you've mentioned it's not just about answering the phone, it's about the quality of that response, which I think my colleagues clearly alluding to there. I think going forward, sadly I can't make that meeting on the 4th of October, but I think it would be good for us to have some context about the figures in terms of how quickly we are responding to those calls, Commissioner, and actually the public satisfaction with how those calls are answered. I think that will give us a greater understanding of the improvement that's being made.
Thank you. Commissioner.
Thanks, Chairman. There's a meaty one at the end there from Councillor Lees, so I'm going to just pick up the ASB question with Anne and Mrs Barnes first. ASB across Staffordshire and Stoke is quite considerably down, as it happens, on pre-COVID numbers, which is really welcome. But it feels like we're seeing more localised issues, particularly town centres, public spaces. And I think that's sort of lending itself to more people being aware of the issue. We're seeing fewer incidents in localities, sort of neighbourhoods, things like that. So I'm interested, Anne, if you've got a particular issue in your patch, do let me know about that. But of course you'll have spoken to your Stafford commander first. It is a priority and it remains one, and it's very much a priority for me and my office. Hence the piece of work we're doing around antisocial behaviour with this community forum. And you mentioned, Chairman, the pace there. I guess if it was down to me and I was out the door, jumping in the car, getting on with the job, it would happen tomorrow. But actually putting together a forum, which didn't exist before, to talk about something force-wide, then making sure everybody's contributing to the discussion, consulting, getting back, and then in the case of the illegal trespass, agreeing a new shared protocol, it's going to take some months. In this case, it'll take about 6 months start to finish to get that done. I really would have liked to have kicked that off in time for this summer, but it wasn't practical. But we will have this embedded for next summer. And with the ASB work, really, really keen to try and get some new awareness around the community trigger. And this is why I need our partners in council-led community safety partnerships to help me, because it's a shared responsibility. But I think that will particularly help to identify these hotspots where we've got multiple reports, but also give people an opportunity to escalate. So rather than waiting years and dozens of incidents, the whole partnership's getting stuck in within the time we've had the third report. So it's a big deal for me still, the ASB. Mrs Barnes, yet it's still not right, as I said. It's number one for me. We've got to get this contact stuff right. There are always going to be situations, a response in an hour to ASB, actually possibly not unreasonable, depending on the time of day, what else is happening. If it was on the night that they got 3 vans full of officers at Shenstone in Lichfield, dealing with the anti-Israeli protest, could well have explained why we hadn't got enough officers in their patch that evening. So it does depend. But not to have the visit is more for me about something that was again in the report, about good communication. In my experience, if somebody says to me, Ben, we really want to know about that, we just can't get there, but we will be there on Friday morning, and I'm here on Monday, I can make a plan and arrange, and I'm not upset if they stick to the proposal. If you just don't know what's going on, then it's very, very confusing. And this is something that comes back to us from victims and witnesses as well, especially now the court cases are going sometimes 2 years on into the future. What is happening with my case? Where am I? What's next? What's happening next? That needs to improve. It's about finding the capacity, time-wise, for the service to do it. It's also about owning those relationships a little better. So I've seen some exemplary stuff with that. The officer who's supporting Mr. and Mrs. Freckleton that I met earlier, just unbelievable personal support for their family. So it's brilliant in some places. And in other areas, we don't quite get it. And I noticed the Home Secretary talking about visits for burglary victims. I think if you're living on your own, perhaps in an isolated area, or not feeling you can manage, and you've been burgled, a visit is really important. For some people, it's not so much. Perhaps you're a business, you've had this happen before, you know what you've got to do. But let the person make the choice and inform them and again, communicate properly. So, Roger, the report, the headline is it must improve. Actually, you know, there's 7 measures in that report. 3 requires improvement, 1 is adequate, and 3 are inadequate. So must improve is almost understating where we were. And you suggested this is stuff in the past to some degree. The inspection was early in the year. They would have particularly been looking at case records from typically the previous year. But all the same, this is not in the distant past. This is an organisation that is now very much in the process of, first of all, appreciating where it had been, because I think the self-awareness was not what it could have been. I think they felt they were okay in some areas. So recognising where you are, then having a full set of plans. You know, where are we going next? And I've tried to contribute with my plan, a lot of which is carried through and reflected in the inspector's report. But then fundamentally, it's about getting a new leader in place who can turn the organisation around. The culture needed changing, the ambition needed elevating, and Chris Noble has done that absolutely from the moment he started. You're nodding your heads because I know you've seen this. Not all the public will have seen this or experienced it. They haven't necessarily met their new chief inspectors. They haven't necessarily spoken to their new officers of PCSOs saying, this is a better place, it's a different place from a year ago. But they're saying that because the leadership and the culture is moving. Is it done? No. Are we finished? No. If inspectors came in tomorrow, is it going to be ticks all round? No. But we're absolutely going in the right direction. I'm very close to this in that, particularly around 2 of the areas of concern that mean we're in this engaged process. It's me, alongside the Chief Constable, who are there at Home Office getting the 3rd degree. So the process he's going through, understanding the problem, building up the capacity to deal with it, evidencing that things are improving, and absolutely to his and his team's credit, if something felt like a good idea but it isn't working, well, we need to think again. That sort of constant review and monitor and progress is fundamentally there. So I have every confidence that we're going to be one of the outstanding police services again in the not too distant future. But it won't be by Christmas, and it probably won't be by next summer, but it will be in many areas pretty good. And I'm hoping, certainly by the end of my time in 18 months' time, we'll be able to say we're in the right place. And by the way, HMI, I've got 1 or 2 little issues with some bits and pieces, but I think it's a very fair assessment of where we were. I think it needed saying, and they said it very clearly, and the organisation has taken it in the right way. No defensiveness. We've got to get on with this.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just for the record, I think Mr. Lee's comments captured the feelings of us all, the views and opinions of us all, so eloquently put forward by Mr. Lees, and I want you to have that message that it's a view that we all share. And thank you for your response.
Commissioner, does the buck stop with you?
Excuse me, member of the public, you're not invited to ask any more questions. Please do not interrupt this meeting again. Mr. Cox.
Thank you, Chairman. Commissioner, thank you for your candid response. I think it's important to put everything into perspective and get things to understand the journey that has to be taken forward. It's clear from the report that there are, as alluded to already, the measures that will need to be taken. This is not an overnight fix. It's not possible. Let's be honest about that. We're never going to please everybody all the time. And as everyone knows, these things that are set to put in place are hopefully will address all the concerns that have been inadequate and needs improvement. Life is about improving all the time. We'll always set standards that at some point we believe that those standards need to be readdressed and set forward and raise the standards. But it takes time to do it. So I do thank you for that. I think, and you might be smiling, but the thing is, you've got to have confidence. And confidence in somebody's ability has to be recognised. I have confidence in the Chief Constable. I have confidence in the Commissioner. I have confidence in this panel. We can be negative, but I promise you, being negative will never address to be the positive. And you may have personal views, but I know I've got personal views. I think, and Angela has quite alluded to, the concerns around antisocial behaviour. Antisocial behaviour can be considered sometimes within people's perceptions, and actually, as the figures will allude to, perhaps not as bad as everybody might think they are. But we have to address those perceptions at the same time and be sure that we are looking at it. And certainly my responsibility within the Lichfield district is exactly that. Recently I've received from a resident. It was a whole list. I was absolutely exhausted in terms of what she considered was wrong. On that basis, I've asked for my safety officers within the district and the police officers and so forth to come forward to me to say what is going on and what are we doing about it. But that is what we do. And we have to have the confidence in doing it. And of course, Lichfield District, we are blighted by two things, as sort of already alluded to at Shenstone. It is an irritance to the rest of the residents and wider community. But unfortunately, it has to be dealt with. The same with the HS2 campaigning. They've got a right to campaign, but campaign within the law. That doesn't mean that you're taking resources away from other areas. And those are the things
Protest
that we all have to address. I'm talking.
Protest is being shut down. It is being shut down.
You are a member of the public now. I'm going to ask you to leave the meeting, please.
I'm going. I've heard enough.
So have I.
I do need to meet with you again.
Member of the public, please leave the meeting.
I'm off. That's enough. Thank you.
Mr. Cox.
Thank you.
Right.
Yeah,
I don't think there are anything
So
to say.
I haven't, but I mean, obviously, I just wanted to address that because I felt that it needed to be done, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Jones. Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Chair. And can I echo what Councillor Cox has just said, because you've said many of the things that I wanted to. Both the Commissioner and the Chief Constable haven't shirked away from this inspection. They've stood up to be counted and they're doing things about it. Just the thing that you raised about ISB. We all see ISB in our communities. It's low-level stuff, but it has the capacity to really cause harm in communities. But as a Cabinet member at Cannock for community safety, I'm well aware that ISB overall is down. That said, recently we've had a number of incidents in town centres and, as you say, public spaces. We've put in place public space protection orders, and certainly under the new operating model in Cannock Chase, certainly the response is immediate. And we've had some real success just lately in finding out the culprits, doing all different things, working with parents, working with some of the stuff that we diversionary stuff, and prosecuting where it's happening. So it's really a positive thing. And I would say to the Commissioner as well, the locality deal funding is really welcome. We put in stuff to ASB. It's a priority for the local community safety partnership, and it's a priority for the Commissioner. And we're putting money into that. The additional 10,000 that's coming to all the boroughs is really welcome. And I think it's not just about the police and the Commissioner, it's about all the partners. We have a local community safety strategic board. It's our #1 priority, and I'm challenging all those partners to actually say what are they doing to address it, what more can they do, and do they want to actually bid for some of that extra funding. So it's a focus, not just for the police and the Commissioner, but we all have a responsibility to address our ASB. And I'm confident, and certainly when the Deputy Commissioner came to hold us to account for our spend last week, that's really good. That's how it should work. So I see a really positive picture about ASB and how we're tackling it across Staffordshire. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr Walker.
Thank you, Chair. I know that the Peel report only focuses on a relatively few areas of responsibility that need improvement or are inadequate. And I know that the vast majority of the work that the police do is very effective and done in a very professional way. The disappointing thing, though, about the report is that if you look back to the previous Peel report, some of the same issues are cropping up. Now, I suspect there are some very senior managers in the force now that were in the force when the previous Peel report was produced. Where is their responsibility and accountability for addressing some of these issues that were raised in the previous Peel report that are now being identified again now, which is probably 2, maybe more years further down the road? You would expect to see these senior managers putting these things right rather than them cropping up again.
Thank you. Mrs Edgeler.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner, for highlighting the situation in Burton with the knife that the lady and gentleman had fitted. I think it's absolutely, having lost a son to knife crime, but in a totally different circumstances, I can understand. Is there any plans afoot to put these systems in every town in Staffordshire? Or is it something that we would use the locality fund for? Thank you.
Commissioner.
Thank you, Chairman and panel. Richard, firstly, your point on confidence, totally agree. Actually, if I hadn't got confidence in where we were, I'd been in a very different place. And I knew what was coming with that report. We know within minutes. But actually, I knew what was coming in that report before they had inspection, because the service was in a different place around its own self-awareness to the degree they were virtually telling me, here's the marks we're going to get here. 1 or 2 surprises. But interestingly, I think, just to pick up Mr Walker's point, the inspections are definitely getting harder. The previous report marked some things good. Possibly under the new measuring system they've got, they'd have been adequate at the time, but they were nevertheless good. And yet underlying it, quite a few of the themes that you've identified have come through again in this report. And this report does look at specific areas of work, but the themes are common: communication, supervision, capacity actually putting a lot of pressure on certain parts, individuals in the organisation, leadership, and use of technology and so on. And I think there's a mix actually between making sure we've got the right people with the right skills doing the right thing sometimes they aren't necessarily in the right job, but they're absolutely capable professional people. And also giving them the tools to do the job. And there's some significant learning that's already been done around 1 or 2 implementations of IT that have had a quite considerable effect on the capacity side, the time that supervisors have to deal with problems, individuals, the staff that they're there to support. So there's more to this than individuals. And in fact, the nature of policing is that the turnover of people is quite quick. You're an ex-officer yourself, and generally police officers retire quite early. And there's a movement at the top, several years maybe. So we have a number of very excellent senior leaders that were there a few years ago. We've also got a lot of new senior people, and the new Chief Constable has been bringing a number of them through the process. So we're seeing a good evolution, I think, and getting people in areas where they can make the biggest difference. I think that will demonstrate itself. On the confidence piece, the only thing you didn't mention, Richard, was the most important element, really. The officers, I've got confidence. The staff, I have confidence. And the volunteers, I have confidence. And that was considerably boosted the other day. I spent a couple of hours out in Lichfield with a couple of special constables. I was totally astonished, quite frankly. They've got the powers of a warranted officer. They can make arrests, etc. And yet, they're not getting paid. And there's a gentleman there, 11 years, and he's doing 50, 60 hours a month in his own time, helping keep the place safe. Absolutely extraordinary. All 3 of those, officers, staff and volunteers, were telling me and Helen and the new Chief Constable, we can do better if we can do it like this. We think we can do better for people if we have that opportunity, that piece of kit. We do that differently. And it's all being worked into the plans. These aren't plans designed in a university somewhere. These are plans based on people's experience and ambition to do stuff on the front line. And I think we can all have confidence as a result of that sort of informed bottom-up approach. And in a way that comes back to your point, Mr. Walker, because a lot of those officers are now chief inspectors, superintendents, 1 or 2 chief superintendents actually, who are exactly the people who have that ambition for where we're going. Brian, you're right. ASB, it's a team effort, and thank you for what you do, particularly in Cannock. It's exemplar really down there. But it's all about working together, understanding, and we do our bit as commissioners as well. The space programme, you'll be pleased to hear, was, I think, the most successful yet in terms of the numbers that turned out. And we're just offering positive alternatives for a lot of young people there that might otherwise be hanging around on the streets and getting into trouble or whatever. So I'm pleased with that, and we'll report back on that in the future. The Stop the Bleed kits, Anne, yes, we're in conversations about how we might expand that. And what will really help, there's an item in the report. Our Violence Reduction Alliance has really now been endorsed by government. They've got a new serious violence duty. It pulls councils' health education into the conversation about serious violence, which is long overdue, particularly education. And there's some funding coming with it, about 900,000 over the next 3 years. We've yet to see how exactly we can use that, but I think that will help us get involved in more direct interventions of this kind. But the Chief and I, and the Chief Fire Officer as well, because we've got these on the fire stations too, we would like to do more. Not just the defibrillator type approach where it's there in a box. Let's see if we can get those kits in all our vehicles so that they're immediately available to people who are likely to be at the instance. 3 lives saved in the last 5 weeks with these kits, so why wouldn't you? I think I've covered it, Chairman, thank you.
Thank you very much for that response, Commissioner. Just building on what you've said, just to share with you, following a conversation with the Chair of Safeguarding, Councillor Spencer, we always value the opportunity to really recognise the difference between operational issues and the responsibilities that we have. So we've agreed to convene a meeting with that committee so that we can identify specific areas of responsibility and who will take the lead on them. And this will be our contribution to work to support you and the Chief Constable. So we're all looking forward to that meeting, and we hope to get a lot out of that. And we'll keep you informed, of course, Commissioner. We will keep you informed. Right, well, I think that's been a useful debate. Are there any further questions on the report, the Police Commissioner's report? Okay, I'd like to move on then now to the Fire and Rescue, item 7. This report again is a mid-term update, I think. But the thing that stuck out, echoing what we've been saying for a fair part of the meeting today, is there's room for improvement. And I'd like you to just speak to that for us, Commissioner, and then just comment on the possibility of potential industrial relations in the fire service if we were to believe everything we see in the press.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, similarly, the Fire and Rescue Service, their report, their inspection report was published since we last met. Good for effectiveness, which is very welcome, particularly during the enormous stretch that COVID made on that organisation. I was very pleased to see that. But I think perhaps important to just stress there's still a challenge around our mixed approach, whole time and on-call firefighting. We need it because of the geography. We do need it, but it is getting ever more difficult to recruit and retain on-call staff. And there are a number of options that the service are working through at the moment, not just to improve recruitment, but to improve the experience and actually how busy and how often on-call teams are called to service. Because what they want to do is make a difference. And so the more times that they are engaged, the better. The room for improvement, I think, were fair assessments of the service that, might not have been made even 3 or 4 years ago, because they were about the service being modern. They were about the type of service we want for the future. And this means a more diverse workforce, not just climbing ladders and pulling people out of windows, but also in the prevention, the protection side. It means more females in the service, and it means a more reflection of our population. So more effort, H and I were saying, in those directions. It is being made. We've got some new recruits who are quite exceptional, actually, and at a senior level. So I don't expect that to be a challenge in the future. Another one around productivity. Now, this is mainly down to how quickly we were becoming more efficient, not just in saving money, and there's been some quite significant changes now in place. I felt a touch unfair pointing out the productivity side, because changing operating models was not an option during 2 years of a pandemic. We've now done that. The notable one is that the service will respond to calls with teams of 4 now, rather than 5. This marries up with, I think, around 90% of the rest of the fire and rescue services in the country. There's big advantages, actually, in this, in terms of financial stability, because we're not calling on people to be available and pay overtime in quite the same way. But it does mean that the attendance of the second appliance is more important than ever. And again, that works into the wider model of whole time and on-call working together. That's working well, by the way. That's been in place for about 2 or 3 months now. A valuable thing. So again, I think the inspector will see that progressing. And by the way, I have a scrutiny meeting, a transformation board, which meets regularly with the fire service, and a representative from His Majesty's Inspector is got an open invite to that, and she sits in and observes the progress. So, we mentioned confidence earlier. I've got absolute confidence in our fire and rescue service. What I'm really anxious to see now is just what the new government does around the white paper, what the service will look like in years to come. What are we going to do about flooding? What are we going to do about climate change? What are we going to do about Grenfell? And is the service ready to step up? And that, I think, Chairman, is a good link to your question about industrial action. There's been some discomfort about changing the remit of firefighters in particular. In my experience, the vast majority of firefighters are up for doing more. They're certainly capable of it. They are incredibly experienced, capable people. They particularly, I've mentioned before here, keen to assist where they can, perhaps in health response, ambulance and prevention around health issues. But these are not in their terms and conditions in a traditional employee sense. So there's some anxiety, concern, understandable around that. Equally, the fire service is due a pay rise, as is a lot of the public sector. They did have a pay rise last year, despite national government guidance. The police service did not. There was a pay rise for fire and rescue. Even so, a contribution which I think is fair against inflation is absolutely key. Fascinating, I think, in the next few weeks, just to see what the energy price cap will mean for real inflation. Because real inflation, if you take energy prices out, protect people from those, is not 10, 11%. It's 4, 5%. And some authorities we're all desperately trying to offer sensible, appropriate and worthwhile pay increases. Actually, for some authorities, anything over the 2% we've been funded for would not be affordable. And just in case anybody's under any illusion, if there is action around 9-10% pay increases and they're settled at that, there will be reductions in the number of staff. There will be reductions in the number of stations. Not necessarily here, although I don't quite understand how we'd avoid it altogether, but in some places, absolute certainty, because there is not the money in the system to support that. So we're into a really difficult period. What can government do to assist? What is real inflation? And what will the employees and their representatives feel is a fair settlement? A action, if it took place, thankfully would be after bonfire night. It would be towards the end of November because of the time it takes to ballot and report back. And the Chief and I discuss at every meeting now what are our contingencies. How would we support, how would we keep a skeleton staff going, and who else might be able to assist fire and rescue. But it's a serious worry for us all, quite frankly. And I do hope that we can come to an arrangement across the piece. Just as an aside, one of the other things in the white paper is about a new model of negotiating pay increases, because the National Joint Council approach isn't working. It hasn't kept pace with growth in wages elsewhere, and isn't offering any stability or future visioning for the authorities or commissioners. And that's another thing that some of the union bodies are very uncomfortable with. So sorry for that negative view at the end, but I reckon it's in the balance at the moment as to whether we do have action in the autumn.
Well, that was the, excuse me, that was the reason I raised that point, Commissioner, and thank you for being so open and honest about it. We'll keep our eye on this and hope that you will keep us informed, because the bottom line here, we're talking about the possibility of the safety of the public if anything went wrong. So we will be particularly interested to see how this goes. And we would like a heads up if you get a sense that we may be heading for troubled waters. I'll put it in that context, if I may. Right, well, thank you for that. Any questions to the Commissioner? Mrs. Edgeler, sorry, yes.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner, for the report on the fire service. It's quite worrying what you just mentioned, actually. I look forward to February's meeting. We was at the precept, but let's not go there. My question really to you is, a few months ago, I attended a meeting with some of the councillors from Stafford at the Beaconside fire station and met with the Chief Fire Officer, which was very interesting. Big plans on the wall. They were going to move out of the big station into the small station, and this land was going to be sold and everything. And then all of a sudden it's evolved now that, no, they're not going to move, they're staying where they are. So why was that decision made, that they're staying where they are and not moving to the small bit? I just out of curiosity, really, to understand the reasons why. Thank you.
Yeah, this relates to the station site Hydrant Way. Yeah. The viability of that project isn't quite as attractive as it was 2 or 3 years ago. And we're actually considering some other options which might involve extra efficiencies involving the police as well. So we're just working through some options for that site. I'm very keen that we do continue to, where possible, share sites, share infrastructure. It's been very successful in Hanley and in Tamworth, and we have a number of additional opportunities we're exploring, particularly for sort of secondary sites to locate the police service in a locality. So I'll be happy to come back as those develop and report on them in detail. So there could still be something happening, very probably will, involved with Stafford, but there is a set of conversations to go through yet.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you for being quite blunt about that. I look forward to hearing the results of your negotiations. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Cox.
Thank you, Chairman. In the summer, we in my village, there was an awful, it was an awful house fire. But I have to commend the response, because it could have easily been 2 to 3 houses that would have been affected. But in this instance, it was just the one. I did note, obviously, from it, and I think the whole operation was, and I was on site throughout, because it was close by, and it also involved housing association and everything else. So as the local ward councillor, I was with my colleague, we were there assisting. But it was noted, in a sense, this isn't a negative comment, really just it's a question in terms of resources, which I know are going to be very difficult. 5 appliances turned up, each from one of our towns, Cannock, Stafford, the one at Rising Brook, you know, one at Burton, and so forth. And thank goodness they did, because it was possibly needed. But so the question is based around that resource, because obviously then you take away from those other towns appliances to come to obviously effectively was one house fire. And that does that not lead to then vulnerability with any other areas? And obviously this summer was one of those highlighted shed fires. I know that the chairman's area was subject to a lot of fires in warehouses as well in Burton and so forth. So they've had a busy summer, and I think that's an understatement. They've had a busy summer. Is this something that is a problem to the fire service if the resources aren't there to deal within the area that we're talking about?
I wouldn't call it a problem, Councillor Cox. It's part of their organisational challenge. Actually, if there's a house fire, there's a real heightened response. Most incidents that aren't easily managed by one team will certainly involve two teams, and house fires will quite often involve more, and they'll have assessed that risk. If it's one of these situations where you've got a shed or one of these new offices people stick in the back gardens behind a block of buildings, huge risk. So yes, the teams will move in, and the whole time teams from the towns will often be first to respond. What happens then is there's a sort of backfilling exercise where a number of the on-call teams will move, so quite often from their more remote location, to cover the primary location. And you sort of have this 3D chess exercise of moving your pieces around to best respond to the next incident. And exactly the problem with that is exactly what happened in London during those 2 days of extreme heat. Suddenly their organisation is all over the place, and yet there's a fire back home. I mean, that one we all watched on the telly, there was a fire station in that street, but they were off on other duties. And ordinarily, they would call on neighbours, or we would call on the West Midlands and others to assist on borders. They were all busy as well. So yeah, there are those extraordinary circumstances like these 1 in 100-year flood situations where things exhaust the capacity, and then you've got to prioritise. But yes, quite normal, and I'm delighted actually that you said it was clear that that level of resource was contributing to it not spreading. That is exactly what it's there for. Yeah, but balancing the risk is important, and that's why those on-call support teams are often employed in covering into another area.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Walker.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioner. It doesn't seem long ago that we were celebrating and congratulating the fire service for a good inspection report. And I'm just wondering if the fire service has got a view or an explanation as to why, in a relatively short space of time, the assessment has gone from good to requiring improvement.
Well, I think they're right to emphasise that effectiveness, the service that we see, the front end, the sharp end, if you like, is still good. It's still good. All our stations are still open and manned. There are teams there. The staff levels, the firefighter levels in Staffordshire have really largely been retained. This isn't the case everywhere. So there's a lot of good news about our fire and rescue service. These sorts of totally appropriate demands, I think, on what a service needs to be going forward around, is that the right community mix? Are you recruiting everybody you should? Is the culture where you want it? I think the service has been perhaps not as quick as others to get there. And these are upfront in the inspection now. They are essentially partly government, but also the inspection and the service itself saying, here's where we need to improve. We need to be more reflective of the community. There have been 2 or 3 people who are not happy with the way they've been treated in the service, and they were playing out during the inspection. I think that's helped to improve the service's self-awareness around that as well. So that's almost an internal reflection being played out in the service. I think the public can be confident, because I am, and I've not been shy to look absolutely at the detail of those situations, that it is in the right place to deal with anything that comes up again in the right way. And one or two of those were specifically around lockdown and very unfortunate situations during lockdown. And I think in a way, it'll be easier for me to talk about them at some point in the future when certain matters have played out. Personally, Mr. Walker, I have absolute confidence in what they're doing, absolute confidence in the new leadership, and it is new leadership, new structures, new people. Rob Barber, Glyn Lusiony, his deputy, have real experience of the place, so they understand the place. It feels fine, but that doesn't mean they don't have a job to do around improving the productivity and effectiveness still, because that also is part of government's pressure. You have to keep doing this job, and in fact, the resources coming are reducing because the demand's reducing. But hey up, it might all increase after the white paper review. So it's an interesting time. I'm also going to be watching, and I'm watching with interest, other fire services reports, because this tranche was all marked down somewhat. I think the next one will be 2, and it goes again to the expectation being greatly increased. And I sit on what's called the Fire Standards Board now. I was quite surprised, actually. The fire service didn't have clearly articulated, shared professional standards. They are being developed. Not by me, thank goodness, by other people, and I'm contributing. But without the fire standards, how can you have consistency? How can you easily measure across organisations, what does good look like? Those have been in education and policing, medical world for decades. So it's helping this service get to where it needs to be a real modern one. We're sort of at the edge of that.
Mrs. Edgeler, did you want to ask another question?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner. A few months ago, we had a fire in the Siltmoor area. A bungalow was on fire. It actually decimated, actually. But my concern was at the time, if you remember, it was Housing Plus, owned by Housing Plus, which is a big housing provider, as you know, in the Stafford area. And it took 2 hours for the fire people to get through to someone at Housing Plus. And I'm wondering now what action's been taken to make sure that that doesn't happen again, that the fire service can get through immediately to someone to speak to. As I say, I asked the question, what action have been taken to solve that problem? Thank you.
Chairman, I think we might have picked that up at an earlier meeting, actually. I was wondering if it was in the last minutes.
Yes,
but
it sounded a familiar question.
Yeah, I think we actually had a formal response from the service on it, but if not, I'll find it and make sure it's back with you to pass on to Mrs. Edgeler again. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you. Mr. Holmes.
Well, Mr. Holmes. It's just something I raised a few months ago with yourselves about using retired officers within the community. It's a point you've just made, that you need to get the officers closer to the community. I've spoken to retired officers and they are already raring to go. We would love to be mixed with the community and advise such as smoke alarms, go knock on doors and say hello, how are you? I think those people, they've got a really good life left in them when they have to retire and could be used because they've got the experience. Could you take that one for me?
Commissioner?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I will. I'm very keen. Every opportunity for volunteering is picked up, and why wouldn't you with that experience?
Right, thank you. Are there any more questions on the fire and rescue safety plan? Okay, item 8 on the agenda, please. Safer Roads Partnership in Staffordshire.
Yeah, Chairman, I'm going to ask my deputy Helen to pick up on the bulk of this because, as you know, she is out and about as far as roads is concerned. Our primary concern here, Safer Roads Partnership, Helen and I are essentially joint chairs of this, some good progress being made. I think Helen's interest and mine goes a bit further beyond this, and we'll talk about it at the public performance meeting again, because it's about criminality on the roads as well. Drink driving, drug driving, uninsured cars, overladen vehicles, etc. So it's absolutely fundamental to the plan as well as that partnership piece around reassuring communities, particularly around speeding. So, with your permission, Chair, could I ask Helen to take that on for us?
Mrs Fisher, please respond.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Chairman, for the opportunity to do this. As the Commissioner has just said, this is a big priority for the pair of us. Road safety runs through the Commissioner's plans. Speeding, antisocial driving, still a big concern for all of our residents in Staffordshire. We did promise to intensify the activity of our Staffordshire Safer Roads Partnership, and I think in the last 12 to 18 months, I think we've managed to do a lot of work to go towards that goal. We're focusing today on the work of the partnership, and just to remind you, that is the two authorities, Police, Fire, National Highways, and now the Commissioner's Office. And as the Commissioner has just said, we now co-chair the board, and it seems to be working quite well at the moment. Now, the partnership vision is working together to improve road safety in partnership with our communities, and we can't do any of this. None of the partners can do it on their own. There's a big call for do something about the speeding in our little villages, and I think what we've presented to you today hopefully will show you what we've been doing. As you'll see from the papers, education is key, and it's targeted at the vulnerable road user groups. There's still too many people dying on our roads, and we need to carry on all the work that we can. It is so important. I'm really pleased with the partnership and the progress that we've done in the last few months. We've included reviewing the governance and structure of the Safer Roads Partnership. We've also looked at how we communicate with the public and everybody else, with the partners as well. We're deeply looking at that, and hopefully there will be a role for a dedicated comms officer in the future. I could definitely keep somebody busy a lot of the time. And we've also reviewed Speed Watch, and I know there's an appendix to do that. Don't know what you want me to do, Chairman. I mean, I'm happy to talk to each of the 4 appendices that you've got.
Well, I was going to compliment you on a comprehensive and very detailed report, and I make an assumption that everyone's read it and noted specifically, and perhaps we'll tease out some questions around it rather than trouble you going through it.
It's okay.
One question I had, though, was on page 36, the objectives. And I'll frame this in the context of pace again. The 8 objectives, it doesn't say when you're going to do them. What is the timeline to achieve those objectives?
Well, I mean, some of them are really quick fixes, and and some of them obviously are they're not just down to the partnership. You know, we are the partnership and everybody who plays a part in that. I mean, I can give you an update on each one, but to me, it's just something that rolls month by month, year by year. You know, this is something that we're not going to fix overnight.
Oh. Well, if I may, Commissioner Smoke, there must be some demonstrable milestones, though, against each of those activities. So if we were to say on the first one, would there be any useful information by the end of the year? I'm just looking to get an update on it rather than just leave it to roll on.
An update on what
Well,
in
to
particular,
achieve
Chairman? I
long-term
don't think I'm understanding the question.
Well, sustained reduction in road traffic collisions. Now, that'll be statistics, won't it?
Yeah.
That'll be tabled in a report, will it? Is that the way that information will come forward?
Yeah, so at the board meetings we get figures, and that's what the thrust of a lot of the work is then goes towards those figures. I think what we've discovered recently is one of the vulnerable road user groups, mature drivers. These figures we've noticed, are going up, and now we've got a working group, and we're working towards what we can do about that. Is that sort of what you want to know?
Yeah, getting there. I mean, if you look at C, to agree a considered approach to engineering and enforcement based on evidence and making best use of sustainable but limited resources. Now, Commissioner's looking at me now. Commissioner?
Help me out.
Yeah, Chairman, I think it's perhaps helpful to note that those are the sort of overall strategic objectives of the partnership. So they're a bit like a mission statement, really. They are not the targets that are being set. We've got absolutely clear targets, for example, on the new technology for speed cameras and the procurement. And Helen and I said, look, you've been talking about this for 2.5 years. Where are they? And that procurement's now underway, and we'll have new cameras dotted around the county and city within months. If you look, however, at the following page, you can see that there's evidence of the absolute priority one there, a long-term sustained reduction in collisions. And it's about tracking the evidence. I'm interested, actually, to know, well, because I know, and we'll do more of this on the 4th, this year in particular, we're seeing a bit of an uptick in the fatal and serious injuries on the road. And whilst some of this is very much in our control and you would set a target, some of it isn't. A number of the incidents this year have been involved are down to medical situations. So this is people having strokes, heart attacks, things like that, whilst in control of a vehicle, which is terribly unfortunate, but it's not quite the same as accidents related to poor driving. Similarly, we've got targets around education and training. So this is to make sure we're getting the right mix of prosecution as opposed to giving out the training courses. And you can see later in the report, page 41, I mean, a lot of this goes right back to Helen championing the community speed watch teams. Those hours there, they're considerably up. The number of groups, I think we're up from 60 odd, Helen? Mm-hmm. So 25% more groups since COVID. People have got their confidence back, being encouraged, trained. They're out there in your neighbourhood. You'll have seen them. And they are doing their work. And you can see there the number of letters sent, which is great, because that's, we don't want to nick everybody. We just want them to drive more safely. So I think what you're asking, which is a good question, is what are measurables? And we'll play a few more of those back to you, and you'll see some of them on the 4th. And you can see on the main chart, Appendix A, there's trends there. And Helen made a good point, one that's exercising us. Those red arrows, mature drivers, 65 plus. There's a lot more of them, which is great. There's a lot more of them involved in KSIs, not so great. So there'll be a communications exercise and all sorts of activities to target that group.
Yes, okay. Well, as I said, it's a very, very comprehensive and detailed report, and the committee thank you for that. So I'm just trying to spark that conversation with my comments, Mrs. Fisher, so I do apologise if it got a bit ambiguous. That was my fault. Mrs. Edgeler.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for your report, Helen. Very, very interesting. And I'm pleased to say we've got a speed watch now. People organised to do one in the Siltmore area, so I'm really pleased about that. But my question to you is, and it's just something that crossed my path a few years ago, actually. In Spain, they have designated parks where they actually appreciate this because you spend time in Spain, I know that. They have designated parks where they actually put crossings, road signs and everything where children can go and actually practice doing all the different things in that area instead of being out actually on the main roads practicing and that. And I'm just wondering whether what your thoughts are on that, as to whether that is something that we could probably establish in Staffordshire somewhere. You know, I mean, I don't know that it might take place in Staffordshire. I don't know every area, but I know in Stafford Borough we haven't got one. So I wondered what your thoughts were on that. Thank you.
Yeah, one of the, on your Appendix C, Road Safety Education and Training highlights, actually it's the first one, primary schools. And I went to one of these up in Stoke-on-Trent, and there's a classroom-based morning where they learn all the little ones learn everything about the roads. And then there's an afternoon where they actually go out in single file, you know, completely independent, being spotted all around the roads, and the area that they were learning how to walk safely was quite, like a lot of our areas, quite built up. Loads of cars, some on the pavements, some not on the pavements, and I think things like that are really worthwhile. You know, at any moment a car can come round the corner. So we are doing a lot of education, not quite in parks like you've just said, but I can assure you that there's a lot of information going into all of our schools for road safety.
Mrs. Edgeler, we've 10 minutes to go.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that, you know, but could you give any thoughts of that, of the designated area with a proper park where the children don't have to be, so they've got some idea when they do go out onto the road of what is taking place?
We'd need a park. Are you donating a park from Stafford?
No, it doesn't have to be a park, it has to be an area. Sorry.
Yes, very nice.
And just a piece of ground, you know, that you could come
I can certainly have a bit of a chat. Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you, sorry, Chair.
Mr. Walker.
Thank you, Chair. The table on page 37 only gives statistics up to 2020. What are the figures for 21 and so far 22?
Ben, do you want me to take that? Yeah. That's what we've got at the moment. There has been a bit of a delay and a bit of an issue with collecting some of the data. There's been a lot of work that's going towards making that right. So as soon as we've got those figures, we can bring them to you. But at the moment, that's all that we've got.
So looking at the appendices, where you've highlighted all of the activities that are going on, all of the education, the enforcement, all of that is relevant to 21-22. So how do you know that all that activity is actually targeted at the problem if you don't know the figures for 21-22? What you do in 21-22, you've had all of these activities that you've devoted resources to, how do you know that that's targeted in the right place?
I mean, I do appreciate that, and these are questions that we're asking as well, but there's not an awful lot more I can say about that. There has been an issue with some of this data. I think the experience that the team has got in everything that they do, I'm pretty certain we're targeting the right areas. If I'm proved wrong, I'm proved wrong, but I don't think the stats will say much different to what we're doing now.
Just to build on that, if I may, I think we'd like a more realistic level of assurance. If you could just take that away and have a think about it. Commissioner.
Chairman, if I may, we've got good sight of the recent information, and you'll see some of that in the performance pack that we're looking at, which is closer to what we look at all the time, actually. I'm trying to get as much of the public performance data to be the same as we see. This partnership has to report certain details to the national body, and I can't remember what that national body's called, Alan, can you? But they've given us a bit of a ticking off because it isn't complete. So it's not that we don't have a very good field for 21-22 and good numbers, but they aren't formalised numbers that are informing the national database, and that's what that particular chart is drawn from. So we'll be able to go into a little more detail, and if it's all right with you, Chairman, I'll make sure that you've got that information to share with the panel in the next week or so, along with the stuff we're preparing for the 4th. Okay. Just to give you some confidence, it's not entirely in our... it's not... Now, I'm going to be really diplomatic about this. The partnership hasn't finished the numbers, but we've got them.
Okay. Mr. Bowles, Mr. Walker, is there anything you want to add on? Okay. Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Chairman. Deputy Commissioner, can I just draw your attention to page 47, Operation Lightning, the Roads Policing Unit. It's really interesting there that arrests for drug tests are almost 3 times as much for drink driving, albeit 42 to a ratio of 15. I think I mentioned to you before, Helen, about what work is going on to do with people who've been convicted for drugs. I notice that it's obviously a key indicator in fatals, and there is the Safe and Sound Young Driver events, which is a positive thing. I don't know from those 42 who were arrested how many of those were young people. I assume a fair amount. But is there any more that's being done post-conviction with people who have been arrested for drug-related offences? Do we know?
I don't know if there's more being done after. I'd like to think they were given something to think about once they've done something like this. It is a worry, you know. I think the message about drink driving, I think that landed a long time ago, just like putting your seatbelt on. I think drug driving is relatively new. I mean, I've seen during the day people being pulled over and being drug tested and under the influence of marijuana in the middle of the day, and this isn't isolated, and then drivers will go on to do it again. Me and my colleague talk a lot about repeat offenders in this, and it is something that I think now I've got a little bit more time, I think I would really like to sort of get to the bottom of what we actually do offer to people, because it's no good, is it, just pulling people over and, you know, doing it again and again. There's got to be some reason why they're doing it, and I think we need to find out that. But it's a growing concern, definitely.
Thank you. Can I just come back briefly? I agree with you. The other things have long ago been not acceptable, drink driving, etc. I think this is something that will only go up unless we do some positive stuff. So if that's discussed at the partnership, Alan, that would be great. Thank you. Cheers.
Mrs Barnes.
Thank you, Chair. Helen, I just wondered, in Stoke-on-Trent we've had a big increase in pit bikes driving round. The bikes, yeah, they're called pit bikes, I think. And I'm absolutely certain that a lot of them are delivering drugs. No number plates, they shouldn't be on the roads. They know exactly where the CCTVs are. They put balaclavas, not helmets, balaclavas, and they go that fast, and then they can go off-road and get out of the way of the police, basically. There's been a big increase. And I just wondered if that could come under that heading of safer roads. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Well, the police are part of the partnership, and I think anything like this that worries the public, they need to know about it. I mean, I imagine that you've reported all of this. Interestingly, I think some people think that once they're off the road, then the police can't get to them. But the roads policing unit do actually have a marked off-road bike. So, you know, at targeted areas, we could definitely see whether that could be used. But I can if you let me know of these areas, I'll certainly have a word and see if there's anything that we could be doing.
Thank you. Mr Holmes?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say thank you very much for this road safety education training, because I'm a big believer in training the children for all the road users and things, because they tend to train the parents. My son is one of those. Come on, children, let's go out on the bikes. Dad, you haven't got your hat on. Dad, you haven't done this. Once you've got those children trained, it goes up the line. It doesn't come down, it goes up. And I'd just like to say thank you very much for what you're doing on this road safety stuff, because it's aimed right at the proper point, right at the beginning, in the schools and on the roads. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr Holmes. Item 9 on the agenda then. Are there any further questions over and above those we've raised in the meeting today from members? No? Item 10 then, dates for future meetings. The next meeting is scheduled for the 24th of October. As we can see the pound signs flashing round about that time, I think.
What time is that? Sorry.
2 p.m.
Just raise one.
Mandy?
Can I just raise one item with the panel, please? At your October meeting, you usually have an annual police misconduct and complaints report. It's obviously annual, and the period that is reported is January to December. And I've had a request from officers to say, could it be moved to February? Because it is far more logical to have a full year's data at the February meeting. If that's okay. I'm not sure why it's always been October. Can we move it?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Is that okay, Commissioner?
Sorry, Chair, the Commissioner has been consulted.
He has been consulted, yeah. Okay.
He's happy.
Right. So there's no more on the agenda today. Mrs Edgley, you're looking fraught? I always am. Okay. So at that point then, thank you, Commissioner, to you and your teams for attending the meeting, and as always, a full and frank and open debate, which we're very grateful for. So at this point then, 12:01, I'll close the meeting. Thank you.